Hey guys, this will be video 6 for the how to design build a custom 58 Explorer replica. Paint it sapphire blue and install shark fin mother of pearl inlays. And I finally got these out of the package, and man, they had them pretty much glued in place. It was terrifying getting them off that cardboard, but I did without breaking any of them. And ready to start doing the install. I actually worked on the whole setup for about 3.5 hours, maybe close to 4 hours last night, just assessing the job again and making the determination as to how I was going to go about cutting these in place. And my theory is when in doubt, or if this is the first time you've ever done a job, even if you're really good, I would recommend just doing everything by hand and using a really sharp X-Acto knife, because it just guarantees that you don't risk getting 70% of them installed perfect, and then all of a sudden you screw up with your machinery and you have to make a repair. So if you do everything by hand, it's going to be extremely slow and tedious and whatnot, but at least it guarantees that you're going to have an incredibly good job. And also you can see it come together as far as like dimension here on the left side versus the dimension on the right side, because every bit of this is determinant on the location of the fret on either side, and just making certain that you get it centered on the perpendicular axis and on the horizontal or the linear axis as well. And I'll talk about that stuff in general, but eventually, because in this video I'm just going to talk about strictly mother of pearl work, because everything that I presented in video 5 was just theory, and this is what I'm planning on doing. And I'm thinking about taking a board and holding this board and cutting this way. It's like, unless you've done it, that was probably really difficult to see what I was talking about. But with this in hand, I can actually show you my jig. And I've designed and built this little jig about close to 28 years ago, and it has always worked really well for me for doing cowboy fret work. I have a nut location up here, and I have a location right here on the board and right here that I can fasten it with long, actually wood screws, really high quality wood screws that grab, and I attach it atop a 4-foot level. And that assures that I stay nice and flat, and then I can clamp my level to a table if I'm doing sanding, because I actually designed this to allow me to take the Stuart McDonald radiusing jig, and I have 2 little holes drilled on either side where I attach a little track system, and it assures that I stay straight if I'm doing radius work by hand or sanding work by hand, where I'm having to do a lot of long linear shaping. Well, this track assures that I don't screw it up. Okay, that's really difficult to keep under control. That was before I ever got confident enough to route my profile. Use an actual routing bit, half-inch shank routing bit with the appropriate radius, whether it be 12-inch radius or pick your poison, whatever radius you might be cutting. But I got fairly confident with the router bit out there, so I don't really do this. I don't do this anymore. So. But you can do that, and it works. It's very, very, very time consuming. Okay, so let's talk about this jig just a little bit. All it really boils down to is, as I just said, it guarantees that you stay on a straight line. And when I started out with this fretboard, I did not find the center of this raw fretboard material. All I did was fasten it to the very edge there, and I glued it directly to the lower the jig. Let me talk about this briefly. I got 3 to 5 drops of CA glue, which I call jet glue, the medium. Here, roughly across that line. Right in the middle, there's about 3 slots, and there's no glue out here at all. And then on the very end down here, where once this gets cut, see, that's the 23rd location, or the end of the fretboard. That's where it will get cut off down here with my fret saw. I'll just cut all the way through, and then where it's glued out here, that'll just get left on the jig, and then it'll be fairly easy to come up here and pop it loose up here, and then reach in the middle with a real thin saw and start easing, or either a putty knife that you heat up with a torch. And I typically do that. I just use a propane torch, and I heat the tip of the putty blade knife, and I slide it up under here, and I melt that glue, and then all of a sudden it'll just come loose, and I don't risk damaging my fretboard. Because I haven't done it many times, but there have been several times where I have built a completely finished fretboard, frets installed, leveled, polished, you name it. It was precision perfect on this board, then removed it and installed it on a guitar, or sold it to a client in some other location that needed a very unique fretboard, and it worked extremely well. But this little drill bit sticking up right here is an offset, which allows me to hang my cabinet building measuring tape, flex tape. See, there's a little hole, the grommet right there. Let me just hold it here so it doesn't fall off. See, I hope that's in the camera. I had to change the camera location to try to get just a bird's eye view of this work that we're going to do in a minute. But I just hang on that right there, and then I find the location as to where I want to start the fretboard. And if I wanted to start the fretboard at this machine fretboard at 0, then I could have started right at 100, and that would have been fine. But that would force you to make certain that you don't screw anything up, because once you start at 0 at the end of the board, then that's the nut location, and you have no choice but to make no mistakes whatsoever. I typically start about 1/8 of an inch in at a minimum. Sometimes, according to the board that I'm working with, typically I start about 1 inch in. In other words, this raw board right here is hanging all the way up to here, and then as you can see, the fretboards are always too long. But it would allow you to do a 23rd fret, a 24th fret, and then the end of the fretboard up here if you were doing a 24 fret scale. And then this tape, and I've got to be real careful because I can't risk it falling, but what you're doing is just pulling a little bit of tension to the right, and you're reading the metric scale on the bottom, okay? And you're using an X-Acto knife to mark off, let me look at that. It's 80, we'll say it's 84 millimeter. So it's roughly 84 millimeter at the first, second, third, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. At the sixth, number 6 fret location, it's roughly 84 millimeter. It's actually a little bit over 84 millimeter, I think. But that's where I made my initial score. And then when I made those scores right there, I just simply used my straight edge, and I just moved it down. And when I say score, I scored each individual fret location one at a time with my cell phone on the table, with Tundra Man fret scale calculator on the table, and I would scroll down and go, okay, what's the distance from the nut location, which was 100, up to the first fret location, and it's roughly 35 point something millimeter. Well, I just measure over. There's no mechanical pencils involved in any of this because you can't trust the width of the pencil. But I have my tape measure up there, and then I make a position the edge of the blade exactly on point. Then I remove, as my right hand is holding down on that, then I remove the tape measure, and then I simply put this up there, make certain I'm up against it real nice and firm, and then I do the very first score. And the very first score is a very gentle, very intentional cut where you're finding the center of the blade and you're leaning it over about probably 80 degrees, 90 degrees. and you're assuring that your blade is truly running against the edge of that straight edge. And you just repeat the process, and you go, and you're continually verifying your numbers and making certain that you're not getting off. But if you do get off, then you just got to make the determination of, well, how bad did I get off? And okay, here's a perfect example of where I might have gotten off a little bit. Okay, this line right here, you might see a microscopic circle. That means that I got that score just ever so slightly to the left. I'm talking micro thousandths here. I'm not talking a 16th of an inch or anything like that, or a half a millimeter. So that when I pull my fret slot, when I pull my fret saw blade across that, I got to make certain that if anything, I ride to the right a little bit, and then I got that one a little bit too far to the left. So I'll make certain that I ride my blade to the right of that score, just a little, not much. But there's no sense if you get one of them off. Don't try to start recutting it. Just make a little notation as to which ones are off a little bit. Here's another one right here. So it's funny. Sometimes the blade, according to how much you've got the blade tipped, it'll go a little bit to the left. So just take note of that. So out of 23 slots, 3 of them need to be moved to the right just a little bit. Okay. And obviously, before you're doing your actual fret slot cutting with a straight edge and a wall that holds the saw perfectly straight up and down, you're putting your tape back up on the and I have all this fastened to the table, so obviously you're not handling it by hand. But you put it back up here and you just triple check everything. You open your fret scale calculator again, and you just repeat the process. And especially once you start cutting your mother of pearl, that's pretty much a defined job that is either going to work or it's not going to work. But let's keep a positive attitude, and let's say that it's going to work really well. Okay, so you got all your fret slots scored for the 24 and 3/4 inch scale, and you're just always in this mode. And if you're building multiple guitars, please make certain that you put some tape up here and put in black Sharpie 24 and 3/4, so that you don't start making assumptions, or or pick up a template that's a 25.5 inch scale, and then you make a mistake. So stay on point. And then at that point, after you've scored it, and I'm right-handed, so I'm working from left to right. But once I started assessing how I need to fit this mother of pearl in, because now the most important cut, the most important first cut that I make is going to be the left side of the pearl. On the left side of the pearl, because that's going to define how far off of the actual fret I am. Then now it was very important to flip this jig over and start working backwards. And I've never done it. I don't think I've done a fretboard starting at this end and repeat this way. Typically, I just stay clamped into the table, and I just work everything from left to right. I don't work you know, from top to bottom. I need to have the ability to pull my magnifying glass over and just look straight down. And that's what I mentioned in one of the last videos that I erased, where you're going to be stretching your neck and your back a lot, your back, in order to look directly down on your job. And that's why you want it to be fastened, or at a minimum, having it on this large jig. It allows you to move it around on the table and handle it. And if you need to hold it like this, then you can clamp it down here and there on the left. Or if you do need to pull it off the table, and look directly on it, then you're able to do that. And also, being fastened to this jig guarantees that you don't damage it. So let's put it up into let's flip it 180 degrees and talk about how I went about fitting that first one. The first thing that I did was, and I don't want to take this tape off of here because that will guarantee that I don't get 21 and 19 confused. Because as I fit each one, I label it with the tape. So that's what I was talking about, where you do a little tail on it, and then I label it with that tape so that it guarantees that I stay in order. But basically, the first thing I do, well, I didn't talk about finding the center line. All right, let me slow down a little bit. Let's turn it back to operation one. The fretboard is not attached to the jig yet, and you simply have a real nice, clean, large straight edge of like poplar. Put that up on here and clamp it, clamp it here, clamp it down there, and then find the starting location that allows you to have a little bit of drop on either end. And this is going to be determined on the pattern in the wood. And I specifically designed this fretboard so that once it's cut, that the natural flow of the grain is going to be complementary of the taper. Meaning, what I'm saying, this is very important to make certain that your job don't start looking wonky. The flare on the natural grain opens up a little bit on this at this part of the wood. They get a little bit tighter up here, so that naturally creates a tapered visual growth growth ring lines going on as they're going down the fretboard. Well, if that's the case, if it's tighter up here and it's looser up here, then I want that to be the nut location, which is more narrow. Okay, so after it's all said and done, then it's going to be naturally beautiful, just the way I laid out the job. Okay, that's kind of common sense, but make certain that you think about those things. Or if you've got if I had some sort of weird, funky little knot in here that I did not want to see, then I might shift the entire fretboard, a quarter of an inch in order to conceal something that might be going on right there, you know. But this board was so clear, it wasn't necessary. I just needed to find, the most beautiful layout of the board. Build your own guitar, as I always say, but nonetheless, the next step would be, well, as I mentioned, and I digress there, getting this fastened to this fretboard. I fastened it to this straight edge side, and I clamped. I had a long piece of poplar, clamped it here, clamped it down there, where you could have two short pieces. All you're doing is making certain that once you temporarily glue this fretboard to the jig, that you are truly going to be able to create a center line. Because once I glued it to that, then I found the rough location that I wanted. I think it's 1 1/4. Yeah, I found 1 1/4, and then I just took the only mechanical pencil line that I made was a very sharp single line drawn right down the middle. And you can see how effective this jig is. I didn't even have to think. And since I'm right-handed, my straight edge, I hope that was in the camera. Since I'm right-handed, my straight edge, my jig is clamped to the stable, and then I just pull that center line and make that one single mark, and then I'm through. Now everything from here, and that was before I did any of the scoring, for that. Not that it mattered; it did not matter. Because the score lines for the fret locations are simply, as I mentioned, just one at a time, done with this exact same little, $10, $15 square. But make certain that your square is true, and you can check that by maybe coming up here in a location that's going to be a drop, and then making a score line, and then flipping it and making another score line next to it and see if they're parallel. And sometimes that's difficult because there's no more wood, but you might start in the middle. You might start out with a mechanical pencil, do a pencil line here, and then move over about 1 millimeter and make another mechanical pencil line and see if those two pencil lines are parallel. If they are not parallel, get rid of that square. It's no good. You cannot use that. If that were the case, I would recommend working with a true square, and to do the same thing. like just do it by hand and use this means right here where you have this clamped and then you just hold this by hand and then you score line here. But you could do the same thing to verify this little square is truly square. Make that line, draw a pencil line, draw a pencil line here, draw a pencil line there, verify there are those two lines that you drew are parallel. If they're not, then get rid of that one as well and keep working until you find something that is stiff and firm and will allow you to do a real clean cut score line, because it is bar none critical that those are perfect. They got to be perfect. Not only do they have to be perfect, but because you're doing this wild ass shark fin mother of pearl that is super precise and straight, everything about this is going to be very visual. Even the untrained eye would be able to see a screw up in this job right here. And hence the reason I made this statement. This is going to be one of the most challenging jobs I've ever done, because it's kind of like the Explorer itself. It's got a lot of straight lines that if you get them off, it starts getting exponential. Whereas if you're building a typical round shaped guitar or compound radius shaped guitar, it'll hide a multitude of sounds. So, okay, so you got that temporarily glued down with your CA glue. I glue a little bit right here, which will get cut and dropped and then broken loose later on. I do a few drops in the middle and then do a few drops down at the end. I'm not a top double-sided tape, so I don't have to worry about high spots, low spots. And trust me, once you do double-sided tape, it'll get you in a world of trouble, especially if you're trying to do some really nice flattening, leveling. Excuse me. So just glue it directly to your board, and then once you make this cut right here, the fretboard is now loose up here up until you get to the glue spot there. And then if you did have a little bit of extra wood down here, then you would have glued up there. And once you cut the nut location and the 23rd or the end of the fretboard location, that fretboard is completely loose. Take a chisel and knock off those two drops, get them out of the way. Then take your real thin putty knife that you heat up with a propane torch and just slide it under here and melt that glue loose, and the fretboard will come separate from your jig. And because you have just done about 5 to 7 days worth of work, 6, 8, 7 hours a day, the last thing you want to do is break your fretboard in half trying to pry it loose from your jig. Okay? So now that it's glued in place and you have defined a center line, you've got all your you've got your scale slots identified with a real fine score. It doesn't have to be, that's what I meant in the last video. Don't score this too deep, because you might screw something up really bad and you've got to make the determination of, oh God, maybe what I need to do now is just change everything and shift it by 1/2 of an inch and start over. So, and then just once this gets sanded off, then it disappears. And I'm creating a hypothetical that should not exist. But what's going to happen after the mother of pearl is in this fretboard? This fretboard is going to get leveled flat on the top. Then I'm going to flip it over, and then I'm going to machine the thickness down to a little bit thinner profile. But I'm going to be machining that thickness off the back edge. Okay, and that's where it ties back into this mother of pearl is so tall. It's so tall from the high E to the low E, or the low E to the high E, that once I radius, I have no room for error at all, because if I machine off 90%, if I radius off 90% of this material out here, which I won't be machining that off. But if I got this end screwed up and it was too high on the right side, then yeah, I might end up machining this off feather thin, so that it actually loses its tooth. It becomes a short shark fin tooth. So just think about how precise everything has to be on the initial surface, get it leveled. And then if you make a mistake, let's say you screw up really bad and it's irrecoverable, you're going to be forced to order another set of mother of pearl, and wait for 3 weeks for it to come in order to finish that job. You have no choice because you've done so much work. Before I forget, I even have this marked with a B in pencil on the back side of every one of those so I don't get confused. But you've done so much work that if you mess one location up really bad, and I'm going to get a little bit hypothetical here, you might have to route out that entire area right there and take this maple down here and transfer it over up into that location and epoxy it in, level it, clean it up, and then cut the new fret slot locations and then remachine that mother of pearl location in order to save that job. Because you've done way too much work in order to just discard it or throw it away. So that's what I meant by when in doubt or when doing something this custom, just plan on it taking you a minimum of about a week to do this job. If not, work on it for a month. If not 3 months, just do one mother of pearl. I don't recommend that. That you need, once you get in the groove, you need to finish the job. But just know this: you better have some extra strength Tylenol or ibuprofen because your back's you're gonna be locked up from all of the hard handwork. Okay. So, and I hate that I digress so much there, but I'm happy to do this video. This is the third time I've done this video, and I've got to cover this stuff even though it might be redundant. So now we need to start installing the mother of pearl. And how I did that first was after I defined that center line, the pencil line on the fretboard, I knew where the fretboard was going to materialize from. I started with this fret right here, and I measured, rather than trying to use a micrometer and like clamp on the end of that and risk breaking that, I just laid this on the table and I stayed in metric. I laid this on atop the fretboard, and I just laid this mother of pearl starting at 0, and I just assessed the fact that it was 45.5 millimeter. So I moved it over to 45 3/4 on each side, and then I made a pencil mark at 23 millimeter. And then I verified that that was the actual center. You probably can't see it, but there's a pencil mark at 23 millimeter. Okay, what does that tell us? We're going to be able to install each one of these pearl from the center line of our job. And then the whole idea, after you find that center line, which a monkey could do, that's about as easy as it gets. Then you're going to define. Oh wow! I was afraid it might have swelled up a little bit, but it didn't. Let me do this. I'll brag a little bit here. I don't break the damn thing. Okay, do you see that pencil line? And I'm sorry, I had to relocate the camera stand and everything to try to help you see this visual as best possible. But it's pretty damn impressive, considering that's the first shark fin mother of pearl I've ever done by hand. Let me get behind the camera, not screw anything up. I moved it around enough, so hopefully that you saw the pencil line. But basically, and I should be safe to just leave that in right now. But basically, when I was preparing to cut that location, I just visually laid the mother of pearl up on the location, the 20, and that might kind of spook you. Might be thinking, oh my God, you got off. Don't. That's not the 22nd fret location. That's the end of the fretboard. Okay, that's the end of the fretboard, and that's the 22nd fret location. And there's the 21st fret location. There's the 20th fret location and the 19th fret location. So it just guarantees that, as long as you're not listening to too much talk radio or getting distracted with people in your shop, you should be pretty safe to not screw this up. If you think you're going to screw up, come in here and make some sort of little indentation or some sort of little pencil mark so that it just guarantees that you're always working. And where it would get you in trouble is from the 9th to the 12th to the 15th. That's kind of an odd jump from, there's like different spacing. But typically, well, you're always starting out at the 1st, the 3rd, the 5th, the 7th, the 9th, 10th, 11th, the 12th, which you're typically doing double dots. 13, you're skipping. 14, you're skipping. Then you're going to the 15th. Then you're going to the 17th. Then you're going to the 19th. Then you're going to the 21st. Then you're going to the 22nd, 23rd. You're not doing one at the 23rd, but you might do one. If you had a 24th fret, you might go ahead and do 2 more doubles at the 24th, as I mentioned in the last video. It would be the octave from the 12th to the 24th. And if you're this far along, you already know that stuff. But this one turned out really well, and I'll show you how. Oh, what I was talking about is you're just fitting it by eye, basically, between the frets. And believe it or not, in case I forget, I was really hoping that each one of these were machined to always be a certain distance off of the fret. And I thought, man, it would be awesome if I can get some sort of means by which everything is exactly, say, 3 millimeter off of that fret location. It's not. Every one of them are different. These down here are much, much, much tighter and closer to the fret than the first one. The first one is about 3 times further off of the fret slot location. So what does that mean? Just cool the guns and do one at a time. Do one at a time. Don't worry about trying to set up that jig and all that crap where you're cranking up a router and you're doing a fret job, doing a mother of pearl job like this in 3 to 5 hours. If you can do that, man, give me your number, man. I will pay you exceptional money to do my fret work, my mother of pearl work for me, because that's a lost art, and that's why a lot of these guitars are so affordable today. Every bit of this is done by machinery. None of this is done by hand. If it's a company that is mass producing, is what I'm saying. Okay. So, and I keep digressing and digressing, but for a worthy cause, as I say, how do you actually pick up the utility knife and make those cuts right there and assure that you don't screw anything up? Well, since you've got your jig here and you trust that your scale is true, and you have now, and I'm not certain I'm going to be able to keep this in the camera. Let me see if I can I'm just going to have to do this right here, and I'm just going to have to do it the best I can. But basically, all I did, I'm gonna use this one right here, even though this is not the 19th location. And I'm gonna try to see when I'm doing this job. I have this light for the camera actually up on the table, and that light is shining straight down. But to do this video, there was no way in hell I could pull that off. So you might have to just read between the lines on some of this. But I know that I want to fit that mother of pearl in there and keep it square or perpendicular to the outside edge. Well, if I trust this tool here, and I made that pencil mark, defining the center, well, then I just laid that up on there. Everybody, this is just freehand. Nothing's clamped down. And then I'm just visually putting it where I want it, but with respect to the overhang of the width of the fret. You know how you have the tang, the width, and the height. The width of that fret, if it's a super, super wide fret, well, then I got to make the determination of maybe this first one, I might shift it a little bit further to the right to make certain that the mother of pearl doesn't end up getting up under the fret. If it does, well, I don't know, just make your own call. But the most important thing would be to make certain if there's a little bit of wood remaining on the left side, that would be more important. It'd be more important to allow it to kiss a little bit on the right side and have a little bit of wood showing on the left if possible. Okay, so the next thing would be you simply just lay it up there. You marked it with a B on the back so you know which is the back side. You find the visual center, and then you just start pushing this into place, and you start asking yourself, am I staying on the center line? And I know as long as I'm pushing up against that pearl right there, I could do that blindfolded by scoring once once I have it locked into position. Let's say we were going to put it there and we were going to center it. Let's say that was the location right there, and I was 100% confident. Then I would double check it one more time, and pull off of it, go back up into it, and then obviously you're holding it in position. And now at this point, well, at that point, there's nothing wrong with taking your mechanical pencil and just doing a stop line on either side, so that when you move that mother pearl out of the way and you make your first, if anything, let me make certain I do this in that location right there. So when you make this initial score cut, you have a start point and a stop point, because as you're holding this in position, do not simply score this. You want to go ahead and cut this. And this, whatever wood you're working with, if it's rosewood or whatever you're working with, just be prepared to hold that with incredible force, because once you make that first gentle score, you want to follow up with about 5 to 7 scores where you're getting incrementally more, you're putting more force into the cut, and just stay in that cut. Don't remove this and try to assess it. You should already be confident enough that you're the location. Cut that full depth, and stay on it. Stay on it. Keep cutting until you know that you've pretty much cut the full thickness of your mother of pearl. Okay, and it won't take that long. It'll probably take about 15 to 20 scores, and just as you get deeper, it'll start dragging. So be real careful that you don't start traveling. You cannot travel at all, but that first cut is critical, because as I had mentioned, it is the cut that defines the visual that even the untrained eye will see. If you were going to have to do any putty work, you would want to do that putty work over here on the right side and on the bottom and on the top. And if you were building a traditional Jackson type guitar, please be putting it in an ebony fretboard or a dark rosewood fretboard, because if you've never done this before, it's going to be extremely hard to cut that really precise and not F it up. But if you take your time and do it right, or just take your time, it'll work out. Okay, so you make that first cut, and you're happy with that. Keep that location. Put the mother of pearl back up there. You're still holding everything in place. In other words, once you get this square in place, don't move it. Don't let it move. And it's just, again, your left hand is going to be locked up the whole time. Your left side of your body is going to be locked up as you're holding this in place, because the next cut you're going to want to make. Just put it there. This is where it's going to get tricky. I'm just going to do the best I can. I can't restrap these, but since you're holding this in place, now you're going to have to reach up here with your hands, and you're going to have to somehow or another lock. And the way I did it, I locked into the middle, and I did very gentle scoring from the bottom, and then I would pull up. I would do the bottom, and then I would pull up. That's not how I started out. When I first started out, I actually was doing this shit right here, and I came right across and I cut the tip of my finger off, just the dead skin. And as soon as I did that, I was like, all right, I gotta rethink this, because that's not worth cutting the tip of my finger off. But nonetheless, by using that square, it guarantees that once you make that compound radius score very gently, you do 5 to 10, 15 very gentle scores, then maybe move your finger up here and hold it and connect the two, and then move around, connect the two. Again, if this was in rosewood or ebony, you could just about machine that and fill it in with black epoxy and get away with it, as long as you had that very straight, defined line back there that it initially got epoxied in place against that wall. But I don't have that liberty here. Every bit of this has got to be cut very precise. And if you can cut that radius there, it's pretty easy to reach up here and cut this flat. And then you really aren't going to have to worry about turning on a 90 degree and cutting that down yet, because what's going to happen is it's very amazing how you're going to be surprised how quickly the job starts routing itself out, because as you're cutting, as you're pulling down here, and this one's only cut about 60%, and please stop, make certain that you stop. Don't make a habit of slipping. You could slip on the very beginning because that's going to get radiused off, but don't start effing up this end. How you got to make certain that you start at a very controlled location and that you stop at a very controlled location, even if you have to just push straight down into it, and that X-Acto knife will go down in there. And if there's anything that's sweet about maple, it's one of the sweetest woods you'll ever carve and machine, because it's strong enough that it doesn't distort and travel, but if but it also it actually cuts fairly easily as well. It's heaven to work with if you're doing route work. But where I'm going this, as I was beginning to get down here and get very deep in the cut, what began to happen is the actual wood just started breaking out, and it was so cool. Now, once you make this initial score, do not start trying to chip this out. You need to leave every bit of that mass in there, because it is the actual, because see, now you have removed the mother of pearl and it's labeled and tagged and over on the side of the table, because now you're having to visually, under your magnifying glass and wearing glasses that what they call it, enlarge everything by like 2 times, then you're actually turning the blade, you're actually tipping the blade a little bit more to the left as you continue to do this cut, because if you don't, you'll create a V cut because of the way the blade is cut on a V. Well, that's exactly how it will continue to cut. But if you leave that wood in there, it will act as a wall by which to help hold your blade in place. And as you see, you can do some very, very intricate carving, but leave that wood in there until it falls out on its own. And when it does fall out, there will still be a very sharp little trough that you've created down in the bottom with the tip of the blade. Get it out of the way and just keep going down. And these, I intentionally cut them a little bit too deep, because this is the type mother of pearl work that once it goes in, I want to guarantee that mother of pearl is flat and there's no protrusion whatsoever. Now right now it's falling a little bit too low over there, but once I fill it in, and I'll talk about this briefly, but when you're doing your epoxy work, this is where you're very much doing minimalist type epoxy work in the base, but you've got to be completely saturated. And there's nothing wrong with coming in the bottom of each hole and drilling a little bit deeper to allow excess epoxy to have somewhere to run away to. Okay, just think outside the box there, because that's something that'll get you in trouble. If you get too much epoxy in there and you got an extremely precise mother of pearl fit, and the epoxy can't squeeze out, it's so tight. Well, if you start forcing it, you're probably going to break the mother of pearl. So everything about this job is it has to be just set in place. But if that pocket is too deep, you'll come back the next day and this stuff will have dropped. the whole top of this mother of pearl will have dropped over on the left or dropped over on the right, especially if you're working with the really big mother of pearl right here. Because I can assure you, if you put that on a scale, um, it's very much top heavy. And if it's all, if you don't have a perfectly precise bottom, that mother of pearl will it's going to take the path of least resistance, and that's exactly where it's going to go, and it'll be a effing nightmare to try to get that under control and hold it with tape and crap like that. Whereas you should have just done a better job with the base, so that you guarantee that you have the mother of pearl basically perfectly flat on the top, so that once you machine this top perfectly flat before you do your before you remove it, and then thin the fretboard from the backside if you need it to take off thickness, then just assure yourself that your mother of pearl, every bit of your mother of pearl work is perfectly flat, as if you were going to leave that fretboard flat. And you will be limited on the radius that you cut. You could not cut a 7.5 inch radius with a mother of pearl that far out to the edge. You would probably machine it off. But since we're machining a 12 inch radius, we should be fine. Because I've cut a lot of really large mother of pearl for the Les Paul type replicas, and it's a very tall pearl down here, and it's I can't remember the dimension. I think it's 1.3 millimeter is the minimum. I think it's 1.33 millimeter, but you really want like a 1.5 or 1.55 millimeter on your mother of pearl. Okay? All right. Check the time. Wow. 46 minutes of some. I need a bell that I could ring, because I guarantee you 90% of everybody just fell asleep. Uh, it's exhausting, but it's also incredibly rewarding when you've fretted for, meaning mentally you've worried about getting this job done, and then you pull off the very first one, and you've got that beautiful of a fit. It lets you know this job's going to go really well. And then it just boils down to just doing one at a time, fitting each individual one within its appropriate bay. That's the third location, so it'll be one, two. It'll be it'll be fitting into that location. Let me see if I can just hold it up where it will end up likely being. So you see what I'm saying? On the left side, I'm just doing the best I can to hold it. On the left side of this pearl, see how much further away from the fret slot it is? Considerable. It's roughly 3 times as far away. I'm guessing at the location. I might be a little bit, yeah, I'm a little bit too far to the right. But all you're doing is just fitting a 90-degree corner up in the left corner there in relation to a center line. And you're just working with very, very basic geometry. These are going to be very easy to do up here, because I'm going to be able to plant my thumb on that baby. Okay. This is probably the one I should have shown in demo form. Probably be something like that. That's how I'll be holding it. Well, it'd be down on the table, but I'll be able to hold it with my thumb as I'm scoring with my X-Acto knife. I'll be able to do probably 10 or 15 passes with some pretty serious pressure, because see, I'm giving support to that weak tooth tip with the edge of the square, and I'm not worried too much. Well, I take that back. Don't try to cut the whole thing. You might risk breaking the tip off that. But certainly use the pearl itself to define the actual finish line. Because hear me out for a second. Your by the time you score 7 pulls on this up here in the middle of the fretboard, that's the finished job. Because once I sand and level all this, I don't want to lose any of that mother of pearl other than just dust. if you're, well, just keep that in mind. That's why the pearl's got to be so true. So once you score this, that's the finished join between the mother of pearl and the wood, which might get stained clear, like this job right here. Well, I say that it's going to get French polished with an amber, and it'll be a little bit warmer maple vintage look. Not relic, not roasted or any of that crap. I think a lot of us hate that, but it'll look like an old vintage violin. Okay. So, ton of information. Had to go off the cuff there. What are the tools? All right, let me show you how you would get this out. As you're fitting this, if it doesn't fall in place like that, back up and punt. Don't don't ever force it. And if I can get this off on camera, I'm going to do it because this is what's going to save you the job or save your job. You're going to be using your X-Acto knife. See if I can just pull straight up. Yeah. Okay. That's awesome. That lets you know that it's a perfect fit. It basically just came out with the tape. But had it if it had been in just a little bit of a bind, and I mean just a little bit, then just take your X-Acto knife up here on this corner and just very gently ease it out as you are lifting up with just a little bit of tape pressure. And then it should break loose. And set it over to the side. That's number 21. And there you have it. So it's a lot of work. I mean, it is a ton of work. But if you're building a really valuable guitar, once that mother of pearl is in and epoxied in, it'll be there forever. And or however forever longs, or however forever lasts. However long forever lasts. Let's put it that way. And I can't think of anything else. I talked about. I think I talked about the binding a little bit on the front end of this video. I know I did in the first video, which I ended up erasing. But yeah, I don't think I've spoken about this. So I'll cover this just very, very briefly. If you're doing binding, well, then you've got to accommodate for the thickness of the binding, and then you've got to determine how you do your fret work. Are you going to do binding on the side that stays very, very wide, and then are you going to step your fret tip over? Are you going to do like a little T? Which I do that type of stuff all the time. It's not that difficult to do, but I've gotten to where now, even if I'm using a 60 thousandths binding, I'm only using the thicker binding so that I can roll the transition of the finished lower into the playing surface of the fretboard. So in other words, if you did a cross-section cut, you would see that the binding is very, very heavily radiused on the outside edge, so much so that when you look at the binding from the top, you can almost barely see a top edge. It just feathers in and rolls into the bevel of the fret. And it's a beautiful, beautiful fret job and phenomenal playing. You never get any sort of fret hang or any of that type of stuff. And that can be difficult if you're working in a real moist climate somewhere, and then you ship that guitar to a really dry climate. It might shrink a little. So just proceed with caution if you're doing binding and fretwork. Binding and fretwork and wood, those are three different species of materials that are going to react differently to the climate that they go to. And a lot of times when you pick up this phenomenal old Gibson or this phenomenal old Gretsch or whatever, trust me, it ain't because it was built that way. It is because somewhere down the line, it landed in the hands of a professional repair shop or a quality luthier that cleaned up all that stuff. And when in doubt, I always keep a fingernail file, just kind of a coarse and a medium, and just kind of always keep that in your box. They're already soft on the edge, and you can just if you get a little bit of a hang, just hit it like that. See, I'm letting that ride directly on the fretboard. It's not scoring anything. Just hit that corner once or twice. Hit that corner once or twice, and there's nothing wrong with coming down the entire fretboard with this right here, and just kind of cleaning that up with the real soft side, kind of like that right there. And then come in with some like a 600 to a 1200 grit sandpaper and just go feather, 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 and leave it alone. And you should have a really nice fret edge. This job won't require that because of the way I will be doing the binding. That's what I meant by the binding will guarantee that the fret stays in, whether it shrinks or swells, which it won't because my moisture content is so low in this board. But if you're working, if you're building guitars in Louisiana or South Florida and you're leaving your doors open, you're not going to be shipping that guitar to Arizona because you'll be getting nightmarish phone calls for the next 6 months from that client because the moisture content was just, they weren't compatible. So, okay, let me check the time. 56 minutes. What should I talk about? Okay, once I got really close to the finish line, the way I cleaned up that final edge was right here. Just a simple little cheap file from like your typical hardware store or auto parts store where you can buy these for like $4.99 in a little pack. Come in here and just kind of clean up that edge. And as you're fitting your mother of pearl in, you know where the tight spots are, and then you can just stand it up like this and go around there. But the flatter you hold it, the longer the radius cut will be. I'm going to stop because I don't want to change that one because I got it exactly where I want it. But that's how I did the final shaping. See, I did not dare do any sanding back here because I didn't want to risk losing that perfectly precise machined line that I cut with the X-Acto knife. You won't be changing that. And down here, the only thing you might be doing down here is where the wood got so thin that was left in, you'll just be coming in here, and I'll have to do it left-handed. You'll just be coming in here and kind of pushing down and pulling back, pushing down and pulling back. Don't dare try to come in here and start doing this squaring off. You don't have enough room. You've got to let that little point naturally form on its own by cutting it out by hand. That's just all eye-to-hand coordination. It's all in front of me. I didn't do any chisel work at all in here. As I started going further and further up, all this material was in here. As this started falling out, then I just started making slices that were like a 0.5 millimeter wide. I would just slice into that, break it off, move over, slice into that, break it off, move over, slice into that, break it off, move it over, and then clean out that bottom. Every bit of that was done with an X-Acto knife. Didn't do any machine work at all. But once you get up further into the job, that's where you'll be able to possibly step up and use these bits to do a little bit more machine work. In other words, you're not going to be doing this whole job by hand. I just wanted to do the really, really difficult ones first so that I would get a feel for how the job needs to be done. And then once I get to about, not necessarily that one, probably once I get to 3 or 4 more, I'll be doing a little bit of machine work up here where I'll be machining all that out on my drill press, running it at about 4,500 RPMs. And then once I get down here, I might machine that out with a 1/4 inch bit, fluted. That actually, this is the one that when it turns in that direction, the blade is cutting on an angle, and it's a real clean overhead cut. If it was laying back, you run the risk of tear out. It'd be much safer to do everything with an X-Acto knife over a 2-month period than risk effing up your job with a router bit. That'd be a shame to do all this beautiful work and screw it up because you got in a hurry. Because even with this piece down here, every bit of this has still got to be cut in. every bit of the footprint perimeter has got to be cut with an X-Acto knife. I don't care how big it is. It's got to be cut with an X-Acto knife because we're going in maple. It's going to be visual. And every bit of this on the bottom is going to have to be cut out by hand. So and even all this up here is going to have to be cut out by hand. You're not going to be able to get a tool up into any of these tight corners, especially these corners down here. Okay, so you might speed up the job, 2 hours by doing that machine work, but you also might change the job. You might lose the job because you made a mistake. Nothing else on the table. I talked about frets, labeling everything, keeping everything in line. The only thing I did not talk about, I keep a piece of nice aluminum here and some 400 grit sandpaper because you have got to keep your point. You got to keep your point on your knife, and it typically works right there. Just keep your point cut. And otherwise, you'll be going through 30 of these little blades. And you don't have to because all you got to do is keep that point nice and sharp. And then you're good to go. All right. Appreciate you guys dropping in. If you screw up, jet glue is the key. The only thing I did not talk about, I'll hit this very briefly. As I mentioned in the last video, you only score these just deep enough to define I can't get the blade in there. I can't see it. You only score the fret locations deep enough to define where you will be cutting them eventually, because you see what I mean by how that is so thin right there. As this material in the middle was breaking out as I was cutting down real deep, I guarantee if you have your fret slots pre-cut, it'll be every bit of this maple over here will be breaking out in little chunks, and you'll have to glue them back in with a CA glue, and it'll be a nightmare. So let the last thing that you do, the last part of the job, let it be that you're actually doing all your fret slots in a fretboard that is completely dry, completely leveled, and just, meaning all the epoxy is dry, the mother of pearls not going anywhere, and then that'll guarantee that you have a really good job. So that's very important. Take heed to that statement I just made, because if you try to do all this type intricate handwork in a fretboard that is pre-slotted, it's going to be a nightmare. It's going to be a nightmare up here. It's going to be manageable down here, but it's going to be really tough up here. And if that were the case, then maybe start with the big ones first and get a real good feel for what your hand can do. And it might even be that you come in with some maple veneer, real short, and glue them down in there and do all the fretwork and then saw them out. Okay, just think through that, because it'll be a nightmare if all of your wood starts tearing out, especially if you're going stain grade or clear coat. Okay, all right, thanks guys. Appreciate you dropping in. If you're still awake, that's pretty amazing. But just get in the shop, do your job, and I'll see you guys in the next video.